Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Well, it's a real pleasure to be here at UCL and taking part in this event. And I'm here to welcome you all, both in the room and online, to this session, accelerating early action, integrating EWS and trigger-based finance with national and international financial mechanisms. My name is Simon Young, and I co-lead a team at WTW, formerly known as Willis Towers Watson, an insurance and intermediary and advisory company. I co-lead a team which does disaster risk finance and parametric solutions. You'll hear a little bit more about that through the rest of the session, but mainly we're dealing with the financing of response, emergency response in particular, alongside other things. But we're also very interested and aware that early action, early warning, driving early action is really, really important in making response more efficient. The more you can do in advance, planning, preparedness, resource allocation, decision-making in advance, when certain things happen, decisions have already been made that will trigger actions. We see great value in that. And we also see great value in bringing the financing forward from what we're looking at mainly, which is financing right after an event. It's quickly after an event, but still after an event has happened. How much of that can or how can we learn lessons from that to bring that forward and trigger financing to actually implement those preparedness actions and those anticipatory actions as well. So we're going to try and cover those and see how those things all fit together and explore how we can find efficiencies to make the overall response mechanism more efficient, make the less than needed resources go further, so that we can be more effective in our response. So as I said, it's a great pleasure to be here. Big shout out to Viktoria, who's co-organized this session, and also to my colleague Kez, who's going to be leading one of the breakouts as well. And with that, I'll hand over to Rachele.
So thank you, Simon, and thanks for the audience for holding up in this after lunch session, which is sometimes challenging. Yep, here we go. So my name is Rachele Gianfranchi. I am the Director of Public Affairs for Everbridge. And in terms of financing and last mile, our direct experience in providing software system solutions that are used to alert the individuals in a country in case of risk is really what we feel very strongly about. And as Simon was saying, we think that there is definitely a role for insurance in the pre and in the aftermath of a disaster, but there is also a fundamental complementary role in alerting people once the disaster happens, or immediately before, or sometimes before with an anticipatory capacity. Everbridge speaks from experience because we currently cover about 20 countries nationwide. We enable governments to reach with alerts 2 billion people, and we have 10 years of experience in this field, including helping the standardization of different characteristic of interfaces between the software and the handset and the mobile operator networks. So what does for us last mile means? Last mile for us is that each individual is told by a trustworthy official source what may happen, what is happening, and what he or she must do. So in fact, we are looking at, if you look at the left side of the slide, we're looking at a multi-hazard. One system covers multiple hazards. The central part is multi-tenant. So one system allows multiple government agencies to be able to communicate emergencies. And the last part is really the last mile. The multi-channel allows to reach individuals with a variety of means. Mobile phones is covering 95% of the population, but the interface allows, the common alerting protocol allows to interface with sirens, social media, traditional broadcasts, and so on. So for us, resilience and societal resilience in particular, and the contribution that this societal resilience does to the Sustainable Development Goal 13, and particularly also Target G of the Sendai framework, is empowering millions of individuals who know exactly what their own specific vulnerability is in seconds. And it seems like a no-brainer when losses from climate risk estimated are to a global 1 to 2.2% of GDP. The technology is proven since 10 years at least. The regulatory blueprint is present. The missing gap is finance allocation. Who's gonna pay for this? And who's going to pay for this also seems quite simple, because the return on investment on early warning system technology is 10 to 35 times the cost of the technology acquisition. So there seems to be a market asymmetry between knowing what the system costs and adopting the system in a potential disaster risk resilience project. We think that part of the research and the academia could help us amplify the message that every disaster risk resilience project would need to include an effective system adoption and management, not only strategy and policy design. The system usage will lead to the clear impact measurement and support the Sustainable Development Goals. So I would like to thank Willis Stowart Watson for including us in this panel. And I'm looking forward to run with Manuel Cornelis the breakout session that we will have after this. Thank you. Yes, if there are any questions that you would like to have more information about in respect to what we just presented, please feel free to raise your hand. Or yes.
The relation of hello. I think it's in relation of what has been presented, but also more generally. I was wondering, what would be the key ambitions if you could dream big for Everbridge within the UK, but also globally? Like, what would be the next steps? Because I think it was already a milestone, the emergency alert. So how do we progress from that?
Let me answer after as well. Specifically in respect to the United Kingdom.
Starting with the United Kingdom, because we're here and that's the focus.
Yeah. And I would like my colleague Manuel, who has been indeed, covering the United Kingdom contract for national public warning, to answer your question.
Of course, thank you very much. The mission of Everbridge is to keep people safe, and I think the early warning, all initiatives, enables us to reach the developing world. If you look at the world map that Rachele shows of countries who have, after 10 years of investigations implemented, are now, well, they're now done. They're kept safe, and they're now maturing their technologies to make it more effective. They've all started with mobile, because mobile will offer the ability to reach millions on existing devices which they already have. So it's let's call it a quick win. A quick win, although the projects themselves involve a lot of stakeholders and therefore complexity. However, it's a quick win with a big ROI. So our ambitions, while attending, is to open up this technology to the rest of the world. What Rachele the rest of the Everbridge team is here to do, is to investigate and look at how we can actually support you in this room to actually do so, because I think you are the gateway to this project.
Yes.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, just wanted to ask about the potential scope for inclusion of broader risks or more extreme risks and the feedback you get from governments on that specifically. So when it comes to procurement technology, do you have any plans or are there any demand sectors in specific government areas or particular risk profiles that you think need developing going forward, particularly to improve the scope or broaden the scope towards broader catastrophes? Thanks.
I would like to go back to this slides, right? And the system by itself is catastrophe neutral. It is a communication system that can be interfaced with technologies that can detect in a much more precise way and that are developing to detect, you know, different types of meteorological, so climate-induced types of risk. But the system doesn't distinguish the type of risk to communicate.
In my experience, what typically happens is that there is a certain critical event which triggers these national projects, whether it's a flooding, a tsunami. So there's one, let's call it a leading agency, which is guiding the way for others. But at the moment that these systems are in place, they are quickly seen as a critical national infrastructure, which yes, can be used and will be used and will be made part of the national defense environment. So yes, so as Rachele mentioned, the systems themselves are, between brackets, just a communication tool, a direct communication tool to the citizens themselves, regardless of the severity of the event. And the standardization of these type of warnings enable to separate different classifications of severity. So if you look at the CMS standard, it starts off with missing child words at the lowest level, extreme severe, which is typically used in Europe. And the highest severity level is a non-opt-out, which in the US is called the presidential alert, which is meant and was designed to be used during a nuclear strike. So the reason why the user experience globally of wireless emergency alerts is because of that framework in order to be used for all kinds of severe critical events.
Thank you, Rachele, and thanks everyone for the questions. We'll try and leave more space during the breakout groups. My name is Viktoria. I'm a colleague of Simon's and Case right here, also with WTW, working on disaster risk finance and parametric insurance, which we also broadly call prearranged and trigger-based financing. The reason why I want to talk about this a bit more in the context of early warning systems is because it's one thing and one very important thing to have early warning systems in place and have investment for early warning systems. But we also need the capacity and the resources, particularly to act upon the signals, the warning signals that come out of those systems. Meaning that the systems, having EWS systems in place is as important as having the resources in place to actually action the warnings that come out of those systems. Now, prearranged and trigger-based financing covers sort of two broad areas. One is forecast-based financing, which is very much sort of applied in the context of anticipatory action by humanitarian actors, trying to bring in resources ahead of the event, often linked to signaling such as early warning systems. And then there is parametric insurance, which is not forecast-based and impact-based, such as FBF, Parametric insurance is based on real-time data. But the way it functions essentially is that based on the natural hazard event that you're looking at, you define specific thresholds, could be wind speed, could be rainfall. And once those thresholds levels are met, insurance payouts are released automatically to the policyholder. And currently, parametric insurance is mainly implemented in disaster risk finance and response contexts. So policyholders could be governments, vulnerable country governments, could be households, could be humanitarian organizations such as UNICEF. And what we have to recognize and understand is that parametric insurance is different from your traditional indemnity insurance product. So it's not linked to an actual loss on the ground. What it is, it's a liquidity tool that basically provides very quick assignment set financing very immediately after an event occurred. And that financing, those resources, those payouts that are being dispersed, can be linked to whatever resource needs the policyholder may have. So in the context of emergency response, we're talking about resource needs that go along with, for example, critical infrastructure repairs, the cleaning of debris, or the delivery of emergency relief items. Could be wash kits, such as UNICEF is distributing to enhance hygiene and water security. Could be food deliveries. The resources can also be used to be channeled through social protection systems and basically come in the form of cash transfers to individuals directly. Now, the reason, or basically one thing to be kept in mind, is that the amount of resources that can be paid out by an insurance cover, what we would call the maximum coverage amount, for one is linked to the resource needs the policyholder has, but is also determined by the ability of the policyholder to buy the insurance contract, right? How much premium basically can the policyholder afford or is willing to pay. And part of our work is to kind of strike a meaningful balance between how much can the policyholder pay and how much would the policyholder at least need to implement a meaningful set of response actions. So it may not ever be perfect, it may not cover the entire amount that is needed, but it may be a cost-effective solution. Now, as I said, it's mainly, parametric insurance is currently mainly implemented to support emergency response or disaster response financing. But why do I talk about this in the context of early warning? As I said, right, so the trigger for the financing is inherently linked to specifics of natural hazard event. Could be rainfall, could be wind speed. And for certain types of hazard events, particularly drought, for example, we could use early warning thresholds such as countries' national drought monitoring systems to not only release resources once droughts are in full swing, but also ahead of droughts. And those resources can then help to finance preparedness actions such as what we basically want early warning systems to deliver. We've sort of learned that, I mean, throughout our work, but particularly also last year, working with Pacific Island countries and the Pacific Catastrophe Risk Insurance Company, PCRIC, when looking at drought in Pacific Islands, for example, when speaking to Kiribati, they very much sort of highlighted that they have community-based early warning systems where once their national drought monitoring system reaches a drought alert, not a drought declare, but a drought alert level, they would have community convenings to sort of let people know that water is become scarcer, to sort of educate around water rationing, to kind of prevent the more severe impacts further down the line. And the ministry responsible very clearly articulated that they are aware of the signals that come out of their drought monitoring system, but often it's the resources that are lacking in order to implement those early warning measures in time and basically prevent more intense consequences further down the line. So that is where we're coming from in terms of speaking, I guess, about parametric insurance linked to early warning systems. The other bit, however, and I think that is something or a conversation that we all will have today as well during the breakout groups, is given scarce resources, right? And whether that is for general sort of state resources, regardless of parametric insurance, or a parametric insurance product that integrates an early warning trigger and a rapid response trigger. we have to make sure that we're doing the most with the little resources that we have. And there is a question about linking preparedness actions very effectively to response actions to basically increase what we can do with the same amount of resources. And I guess against that background, that is the conversation we would want to have today. We'll be joined later by panelists from UNICEF, TICRIC from the Pacific, and from India, early warning systems in India. And we would break into, I think, 2 breakout groups likely rather than 3 right now, given the amount of people. We would break into 2 breakout groups in the room, and I'm gonna be discussing with the audience online. The topics of the breakout groups, and I'm gonna hand over to Rachele in a minute to introduce hers. Breakout group number 1 would be hazard and country-specific technologies for effective early warning system software and platform analytics. And I would say that one is over there by the table. And then the second breakout group is going to be run by my colleague Kes, and will focus on country-specific preparedness and response data. Basically, how do we identify the kind of measures that we would need to implement in a given context, and how do we cost those? And I wouldn't, if everyone is okay with it, I would say that the half of this room sort of goes into this breakout group, the half in this room goes into the second breakout group. People who really want to be in a different breakout group can obviously switch. And I'm going to be discussing online with the audience about how to best link preparedness and response actions. Is that clear?
Thank you.
Yeah? Okay, great. Okay, so we're going to do a quick report back from the breakouts, and then we're going to hear from our practitioners in the room and online, I guess, how they're dealing with the challenges that you guys discussed, and over to Rachele for the first breakout.
So in our breakout room, we run a scenario asking the participants pretty straightforward question. Why would you finance a nationwide public warning system? And the responses covered pretty much the whole spectrum of value that is generated by such systems in relation to protecting and creating resilience, high return on investment, saving lives and livelihoods, containing critical event escalation, informing awareness, anticipate risk, allow for business continuity, capitalize on existing infrastructure, notably the telecom one, and facilitate multi-tenant coordination between different government agencies. And the example of the UK Natural Hazard Partnership was mentioned. So that was it. We had a really nice spectrum of experiences, actually. So,
Kes, are you good to go? Yeah, no, I can. Yeah, I can also go next. Whatever is easier. Do you want to go? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. So in our group, we were looking specifically at the preparedness and response actions. We've talked about 2 main questions. The first one was identifying and how you would go about identifying appropriate preparedness and response actions. And we touched across a couple of points here from sort of academia and also practice. One of those was talking about how organizational mapping, so talking about what resources are available and where, can play a really invaluable role in this process. As it helps you or allows for prioritization, but also thinks about what actions can really be taken. And particularly with organizational mapping or trying to identify these actions, thinking about the critical needs and where the pinch points are across different sectors, as well as making sure that you're linking climate hazard and info with other sectors, and health professionals came up as an example in this situation, particularly healthcare systems after flooding. The second item that we talked about was how do you then go about costing those actions, both in terms of, sort of cost benefit analysis and how much you might need to fund them. And so one of the first points that came up on that was thinking, what is the value actually of what you're trying to protect?
And that covered both the value in the short term and the long term and the balance between that, thinking about both tangible assets, but also intangible ones that maybe traditionally don't have an economic value placed against them. And also thinking about both the direct impacts, but also the opportunity costs of what impacts you would take when you're thinking of prioritizing. We also had a discussion around the sort of costs of goods and services, thinking about the range of relationships that you might need in order to prioritize these actions. And then the idea as well of sort of, if you do have physical stock needed for preparedness or response, where that needs to be and how you factor that into costing.
Thank you, Kes. I'm gonna wrap it up with our online breakout group, and big shout out to my three most active participants, and including Sana and Filipa. So what we were discussing links very well to what breakout group number 2 has been discussing as well. Maybe looking into what kind of considerations I guess we have to take when we think about combining early action preparedness measures with response measures. And I'll try and keep it short. The first question is, how do we actually identify, I guess, cost effective, a combination? What could at least be an approach to doing so? And one of the discussions, or I guess perspectives that we had, is that obviously would look into historical events, what worked well, what didn't work so well, but try and take a sequencing approach in terms of, if you know, right, that during a drought response or cyclone response, action B, such as the dispatching of desalination units, needs to happen, work your way back from there and understand what is critical in terms of preparedness actions to happen beforehand. Could be maintenance, of these desalination units, or other actions. That was one. We had great examples, including from Mozambique, when it came to, for one, how to select what types of preparedness and rapid response combinations are the most cost effective, because it's one thing to identify these combinations. If we then have scarce resources and basically have to try to get the most impact for the money that is available, one has to prioritize those combinations in themselves as well. There were a few, considerations that we discussed around that. The one certainly is to, look into which type of actions would cause what we call no regret actions when it comes to early actions. So even if if these actions are implemented, even if the event actually then doesn't materialize, do they still have a beneficial impact that justifies that intervention? That is one. Another consideration we're talking about the selection between these different combinations is obviously cost versus or cost combined with number of people impacted. And then there was also one very good argument where, as to the extent possible, one should look into implementing actions, also response actions, that could then have an impact that lasts beyond the actual event. For example, if you hand out or install water monitoring equipment and you train communities on using that equipment to monitor water resources or salinity levels or whatever, that equipment should be handed over to those communities to help to prepare better ahead of the next event, thereby also increasing, the overall cost effectiveness. We had a very sort of, rich debate online. I can't really do it justice, but the last question that we had was, less conceptual, because this is all also very theoretical. Was less conceptual, but was looking into what does actually need to happen on the ground in order to operationalize the implementation of these combinations. And one very strong argument from Mozambique that came in was that it is we all know this, but it can't reiterate it often enough. It is a multi-stakeholder process, right? Where you need government actors, you need local actors, you need NGOs, civil society organizations that implement together. And in this particular context, we had the government being responsible in Mozambique for Cyclone Freddy, the government being responsible to pre-position goods, then working with local authorities, communities in terms of distributing those goods, and local communities and NGOs really working on the ground, going from house to house, sort of making sure the elderly are okay, evacuating, and so on and so forth. So this is where I guess the preparedness and the response bit come together quite nicely, as well as the multi-stakeholder process that needs to happen. And one last thing that was also mentioned from Mozambique was a similar experience that we had in talking to Kiribati and Tonga, I think last year, and others. Oftentimes the early warning signals are well understood, but it's sort of political constraints and financial constraints that kind of hinder jumping, I guess, from realizing or hearing those signals to action, and then actually, I guess, making the best use of the early warning systems that we have in place. So great discussion, and without any further ado, I would ask Emma from UNICEF to come up to the stage, as well as Paul Wilson from PCRIC to go into our panel. I think we need 1 minute for our tech team to set up for the participation of our online panelists. So give it 10 seconds for rearranging, and then I hand it over to Simon.
So a very quick introduction. We brought this panel together to provide a practitioner's perspective on some of these questions and discussions that we've had in the breakout groups, and try to kind of highlight some of the ways in which kind of the challenges and benefits of operationalizing early warning systems through investment and linked to trigger-based financing can actually materialize on the ground. So we have four panelists, 2 with me here and 2 online. We have Shreya Wadawan, who is a program associate with the climate resilience team at the Council on Energy, Environment and Water in New Delhi in India, joining us online. And Shreya's worked a lot on early warning system development and setup in India. We've also got Emma Rayburn here to my right, and Jen Stevens online from UNICEF, both from UNICEF. And they've been working on integrating preparedness and trigger-based crisis finance for children. And then to my left, I have Paul Wilson, who is a catastrophe risk modeling expert with the Pacific Catastrophe Risk Insurance Pool, PCRIC, who is representing CEO Lotu Palu, who's based in between Tonga and Fiji, actually. So wasn't able to be here in person, but Paul's a more than capable replacement, and PCRIC has been working on insurance solutions for drought preparedness and response in the Pacific. So I have a couple of questions for each of you. I'm going to start with Emma and Jen. Can you guys tell us a little bit more about UNICEF's Today and Tomorrow initiative, what it's about, and UNICEF's lessons learned from mobilizing finance for its implementation? Jen, I think we're going to start with you on that one.
Yes, thank you. So the Today and Tomorrow initiative was established as a first of its kind, holistic and unified climate and disaster risk finance solution targeted toward measurable results for children over the pilot phase of 2023 to 2025. It bridges a tomorrow component, parametric insurance coverage, to rapidly deliver cyclone disaster response funding based on a predefined child cyclone index, paired with a today component to build preparedness and longer term, no regrets, low carbon solutions and overall climate and disaster resilience of children and their communities. And the initiative delivers finance and technical assistance to reduce children's exposure and vulnerability to climate change and disasters, while also engaging children and young people in nationally and locally owned solutions, and strengthens essential services for children. I mentioned before that it's a first of its kind, and it is in at least 2 ways. One, in terms of filling the gap, a critical gap for child responsive disaster risk finance, and 2, pairing risk transfer for residual risk in the same initiative as long-term climate and disaster resilience building to enable a paradigm shift for us all to shift towards reducing disaster impacts over time. And I'll hand it over to Emma now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jen. And I think there are two sort of issues, and I come more from a fundraising background at UNICEF, where we are trying to ensure that not only are we making children and their lives more resilient to climate shocks, but we're also trying to make sure that when events do happen, that response can be as fast as possible. And the Today and Tomorrow initiative is a way that we can release funds to our country officers, who are the UNICEF team members on the ground in country, who are able to then deliver that aid and support. And that aid and support is always responsive to individual country needs. And I think one of the reasons why we're able to do that effectively is because UNICEF operates in over 190 countries, and our teams who are working in those offices understand those local communities. They know the people that they're working within. They understand the human complexities of the environments that they are working within and the differences in every single country. We want to be able to make sure that responses happen as quickly as possible. And the way that we are able to do that is through flexible funding. I think that, as people have seen through things like the recent disaster in Ukraine, there are some events that really capture public imagination and that receive huge quantities of public funding, and others are what UNICEF would call, silent emergencies, or emergencies that are heavily underfunded, that people just either don't know about, or that media and sort of more mainstream news outlets and sources aren't covering as much because they're more ongoing. And building climate resilience is a part of that. The preparedness is something that I think from a fundraising perspective is a little bit less, it's less emotive. And so I think it's harder for people to connect with that when it comes to handing over money, really investing and being able to see the ROI that we've been talking about so much today. We at UNICEF have a fund called the Children's Emergency Fund, and that fund is designed to be flexible income. So you can donate money at any level. So anyone in this room could donate £5 today, or a corporate company could donate $1 million. And that money is then allocated by UNICEF where that funding is most required, rather than where that individual person thinks it should be going, which gives UNICEF as an organization the opportunity to release funds much faster. So, for example, when the earthquakes happened in Syria and Turkey earlier in the year, UNICEF was able to instantly release funding to that office in order to be able to then immediately commence work, while also running a fundraising campaign at the same time. So you have two separate mechanisms happening there. It also means that UNICEF is able to fund resilience programming in country that is perhaps less talked about than emergency response. So, for example, building climate resilient schools, the impact of that means that if there is a climate emergency, the local community can use that school for shelter. It means children's education can carry on, and it's a very holistic view at how do we respond to disasters and emergency in a way that takes into account the entire lives of children and of their families and minimizes risk as much as possible. And Today and Tomorrow is an innovative continuation of those priorities, and it's been very successful so far, and we're very excited to see how it continues.
Thanks very much, Jen and Emma. I have to say, I think both myself and Viktoria have worked kind of and been in the field with your field officers, and those local relationships with the government, but also with local communities, local officials, other NGOs, etc., is really striking. That those are long-term relationships. They're very deep and rich relationships. I think that's clearly really important to make sure that what happens in New York and Geneva actually has an impact and relates to what's going on the ground. Shreya, I'm going to turn to you now. Based on your work in India, what would you say are the main challenges in building early warning systems, and what more could be done to increase stakeholders' awareness and investment in early warning systems?
Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you for having me here. Now, to answer your question, I'd like to steer a little bit and tell you a little bit about the study that we conducted. So we at CEW assessed the effectiveness of nationally operated early warnings and multi-hazard early warning systems in mitigating the impacts of hydrometeorological hazards, specifically for floods and cyclones in India. And our key stakeholders in the study were the community members who are most often impacted by these hazardous events. So to assess how an early warning system or a multi-hazard early warning system contributes to the resilience of any Indian state, we proposed a first of its kind vulnerability to resilience model, wherein the resilience within the early warning system is a function of three key components. That was availability, that is the presence or absence of the system itself. Accessibility, that is the share of people who have access to the information in order to take immediate action. And finally, effectiveness, that is the presence of governance systems and financial frameworks which are already established and installed for the implementation of early warning systems in India. So I'll try to break down the challenges and ways to implement and mitigate these challenges also under these three broad buckets for you all. So the first bucket being availability, we found that approximately 66% of Indian citizens are exposed to extreme flood events, and around 33% and only 33% have an availability of early warning systems over them. Whereas only 25% of Indian population is exposed to cyclones, but all of them have an availability of cyclone multi-hazard early warning systems over them. So this can be attributed to the fact that the frequency and intensity of extreme climate events has been increasing exponentially over the last few decades, so to say. And we have seen an increase of almost around fivefold through our study in India. So this makes making early warning systems available to a larger population a big challenge, because this involves a lot of resource constraints in a country like India that is still developing. So setting up and mainstreaming and maintaining a robust early warning system requires investment in various elements of an early warning system, that is equipment, data collection networks, communication systems. And unfortunately, there is a lack of adequate infrastructure and technology that can support all of this, these different elements of the system. So this can be overcome based on our research through three targeted interventions. So the first one being the most obvious one, that is advocacy and policy. So engaging policymakers and advocating for the integration of early warning systems into DRR and allocating funds to prioritize early warning systems as a critical component of the overall disaster management approach is crucial for this to be implemented at scale in India. Then obviously comes the private sector engagement, because involving private sector can lead to innovative solutions and increased investment in this domain. And partnerships with technological companies, telecommunication providers, and insurance companies can help strengthen the overall infrastructure of the early warning systems. And finally, investing in R&D, that is research and development, to improve the overall technology and methodologies used in early warning systems. So this includes exploring innovative approaches such as leveraging satellite technology and artificial intelligence for early warning systems, not only data analysis, but also last mile connectivity, which is already being done across multiple states in India. For example, Assam and Bihar have installed very new technological based, AI based early warning systems for flood mitigation in the country. Now, the second bracket being accessibility to early warning systems and the information that they provide. So we found that most of the exposed population in India can access early warning information through a mobile or telephone connection. So to put numbers into perspective, we found that 88% of Indian states and all the 100% of Indian states exposed to cyclones and 88% of Indian states exposed to floods can access early warning information based on a high teledensity ratio. That is, they have a mobile connection or a telephone connection available with them. However, what was a constraint or a challenge that came up in this pillar was that many people do not understand the significance of the early warning system itself or how to respond to such warning messages effectively. So in India, we found that training programs, drills, and educational outreach help raise awareness and empower essentially the communities with knowledge needed to take action when these warnings are issued. So therefore, investing in public awareness campaigns is also key to increase the effectiveness of these early warning systems. And finally, when we talk about effectiveness of these systems, we had to judge the effectiveness of the system itself. So in India, our research found that the effectiveness of early warning systems heavily depends on accurate and timely data. So as in other places, data collection can be hindered by multiple factors. And in India, the key challenges were lack of monitoring stations, outdated equipment, and data quality issues. That is, the data was not collected at a very granular level that can help decision makers make a right decision at a block level or at a taluka level. So ensuring data accuracy and reliability is an ongoing challenge, but it can be improved by leveraging knowledge transfer through international collaborations to facilitate the adoption of various new age cutting edge technologies that are developing in other nations. And this can enable proactive response in India as well as other neighboring developing countries. And last, but the most crucial challenge is securing consistent and sustainable funding, for which we are all like discussing here. So the key gap that we found through our research was not the lack of availability of funds, but it was in an underutilization of the allocated funds. So we knew that the government has enough allocated budget under the DRR heads for early warning systems already allocated to them. However, they faced a lot of challenges in implementing and utilizing those resources that are already being allocated to them. And this can be improved by finding innovative financing mechanisms and securing commitments from multiple stakeholders that can channel funds into different elements of an early warning system. As we know, there are multiple components involved. So if we have clear demarcated allocation of funds under all of these elements, then that will actually help us mainstream these funds and build a sustainable and robust early warning system mechanism in India or in any other country. Yeah, that is where I like to rest my response. Thank you.
Freya, thanks so much. That was incredibly interesting and amazing in-depth look at the situation in India. I'm not ignoring you, Paul, but I'm going to go back to Jen. But Jen's UNICEF's Global Resilience Lead. Jen, I'd be interested to hear your perspective on what Shreya's just shared, what came out of the breakout groups in terms of, globally, what are those key challenges to strengthening disaster preparedness and response systems? How much of those points that Shreya has raised in India resonate in other parts of the world?
Well, the points resonate a lot. And I think, Shreya touched on the really critical elements, just to echo some of the points that she said, to build on what Shreya was mentioning about combining and pulling together early warning systems with wider disaster risk governance, for example, and then also the importance of finance. Many moving parts need to come together, but what will make or break all of it is to have the right financing. So to go beyond the infrastructure and go toward action and user-friendly follow-through that pivots the cycle towards less losses over time and protects hard-earned development progress. So it really needs to tie together when we're working on preparedness, when we're doing early warning systems. It has to go into that wider commitment that governments make for disaster risk governance. So for example, on early warning systems, beyond investing only in their setup, but also the financing systems and capacities for more effective preparedness and response, creating the safety nets while also already working to reduce the risk long-term with those no regrets actions that Viktoria was mentioning earlier, and having those streams together and not separate, so that we have everything in one coherent balance, so that the networks, the people, the capacities, the technologies, the systems can go together in tandem for better results, so that we don't have to start from scratch in different silos. It's not easy because a lot of the financial flows out there cannot be blended. So it's a development flow, it's a humanitarian flow. This is a common challenge and an obstacle that we have to overcome. Insurance is a good example, especially how it's been leveraged through the Today and Tomorrow initiative, because it's not been done in a standalone way. It's intentionally been paired with wider resilience building. So when we support capacities on early warning systems, it's built into alignment with the wider disaster risk governance or the national adaptation plans in a country. And it ends up helping governments to implement their commitments and not creating a siloed stream. And at the same time, it's not business as usual. And it has been deliberately applied to address an identified gap. So for example, child responsive early warning systems is an immediate gap that we need to fill. And the Secretary General's initiative for early warning for all cannot really be for all unless it also includes adaptation for being more effective for children, for example. And so the way we've put it together in the innovative finance mechanism through the Today and Tomorrow initiative, it's child responsive, it's addressing an identified gap. It's also built together with the wider disaster risk governance, and it's a financial flow that can bridge across humanitarian and development needs. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jen. Paul, I'm going to turn to you and the Pacific now. We've heard about how linking insurance with early action preparedness is really critical. PCRIC, you've been working with PCRIC for a few years now. Can you give us a little background on what PCRIC is all about, and also how it itself is trying to do that linkage between kind of early action preparedness and then with the insurance program?
Thanks, Simon. So yeah, hi, my name's Wilson, and I've been working with PCRIC now for a couple of years, and PCRIC are a regional insurer. We are a not-for-profit entity structured within a foundation which has representation from the Pacific Island countries themselves, but also donors who are part of the overall governance of PCRIC. We have traditionally focused on providing disaster risk financing solutions, so making that part of the agenda within the Pacific, in particular, providing cost-effective disaster risk financing insurance, which to sovereigns. Recently, that's expanded and grown into providing, also looking at the provision of disaster financing solutions to state-owned enterprises, which promote the overall resilience of the Pacific Island countries. The big shift in emphasis over the past couple of years has been PCRIC has traditionally focused on what I would call sort of catastrophe insurance products. Those products which respond to the very low probability, very severe impact catastrophe events. So the occurrence of earthquakes, cyclones throughout the region. Those events fit within that responsive framework. They're very hard to predict, they're very hard to see coming, there's very little you can do traditionally in advance of those products, in advance of those events occurring in real time. So you have that responsive element to them. They occur and we help provide liquidity and financing to support the response to those events. PCRIC, however, has a responsibility to serve the entire Pacific region, the entire country region. And what we identified is that by engaging with our clients, we had a product suite which was very focused on a subset of the countries in the region. And we were not being particularly responsive to the sort of more equatorial region, where there were countries who were not so exposed to cyclone risk or earthquake risk, but were exposed to events such as drought risk, were exposed to events such as excess rainfall or flooding event risk. And in designing and thinking about the products which were suitable for those countries, so responding to our clients, we identified that drought risk in particular was very different to the kind of risk which we traditionally design products for. You know, drought risk is something which develops over time, and in which case you can identify the early stages of that drought occurrence, and you can build in the financing and mechanisms to respond at the very early stages of the occurrence of that event and reduce the overall impacts of that event over time. So really it was an identification that to serve all of the clients within the Pacific region, we were needing to design products which responded differently, to design products which responded to not just the acute shock events, but also design products which were able to respond to events which had a timescale, had an evolution over time, in which case actions can be taken earlier in the life cycle of those events to mitigate the overall impacts. And it was really about thinking about how we could design a different set of products, which led into the idea of building products which not only had that responsive element to them, a sort of rapid response element to them, but also had that ability to integrate an early action part of that product line. So it's really about designing products which serve the need of the entire sort of region we were operating in.
Thanks very much, Paul. That's great. My next question is going back to Shreya and just kind of touching on a little bit about how, if you have invested, we've heard about how important the investment in the early warning system is, but that doesn't actually guarantee that people are going to actually heed those warnings, take them on board, and I think you said it yourself, actually, you know, carry out the actions that the desired actions on hearing those warnings. Paul's just kind of touched on that there are ways in which we can help governments to you know, implement actions, I guess, at the sovereign level, including through financing. But I wonder what your views kind of from the field are in terms of how we make what are the key factors to ensuring that stakeholders actually respond to the early warnings that are coming their way, and that leads to actual kind of protection of human life as well as livelihoods and communities.
Thank you for such an interesting question, Simon. First of all, I completely agree with Jen and Paul that merely having an early warning system in place is not sufficient. The success of the system depends on several key factors and linking multiple actors together to form a chain to enable early action. And as Paul highlighted, each disaster is different and requires a different set of enablers. So drawing from my experience of working on early warning systems in India, I'd like to highlight 5 key factors that ensure that we can build a demand for this tech. Because if there is demand and people can follow instructions of or like enable early action through these warnings, and the demand is high, then the funds will follow. So the first key factor in this would be localized and contextual information. So one of the most critical aspects is tailoring the warnings to the specific needs and understandings of the local community. So in India, we have found that early warning messages are more likely to be heeded when they are provided in local languages, considered we have a variety of people speaking a variety of different languages. They come from different cultural backgrounds, and so making the warnings themselves very local and context in the context is very important. And a simple way to put this would be people accept what they understand. And this was very recently observed during the cyclone Biparjoy that hit the coast of Gujarat and Maharashtra just a few months back, wherein the warnings were actually released in the vernacular languages, and people were able to understand them, communities were able to act on them, and then actually only actually no lives were lost in this event due to actual hitting of the cyclone, due to the landfall of the cyclone itself. Then the second key factor would be community engagement and building trust, as building trust with communities is very essential in making communities accept the information that they are being provided. So we have seen when early warning systems initiatives actively engage with the local communities, stakeholders are more likely to respond to warnings wherein they can trust the source of the information. So it has been mentioned quite a few times already during this session that it is essential to mainstream inclusive and impact-based community-led multi-hazard early warning systems. But now this can be achieved by leveraging local self-help groups, youth volunteers, and identifying elderlies from the local communities so that they can help you achieve that last mile connectivity and effective end-to-end information dissemination to people, because they can actually trust the source of information from which the information is coming from. Then the third most important factor will be inclusivity and accessibility. So ensuring that early warning system information is accessible to all segments of the population is vital. In India, where there is a wide range of socioeconomic and cultural diversity, it actually makes it more crucial to consider the needs of the vulnerable groups, including those with disabilities, different genders, different age groups, and also those in remote areas, because a lot of community groups are actually huddled in smaller remote areas, which might be completely disconnected from the mainstream areas. So this necessitates providing information through multiple channels and not just relying on one channel to communicate the information. So this can include radios, SMSs, community networks, social media, sirens, loudspeakers, and so that they can actually ensure broader accessibility to the information itself. But these community channels then have to be effective. Therefore, the early warning systems should be dynamic and adaptable. So a continuous improvement and feedback loop should be established, wherein we can receive feedback from the stakeholders, including these community members, which will help us refine the system over time. So in India, we have seen that involving the community in evaluating the effectiveness of the warnings they have received and making necessary adjustments to the messages themselves based on their inputs fosters a sense of ownership and accountability, and makes the messages that more impactful and allows the community to take action that more clearly and in advance. And finally, nothing is achievable without a strong political will and forging partnerships. So strong government commitment and partnering with local NGOs, civil societies, and even international organizations like UNICEF and IUCN that have huge groups and communities working on ground, on field, and interacting with communities on a daily basis is actually very essential for the success of any early warning system initiative. So in India, government collaborations between agencies and NGOs has been instrumental in strengthening some of the early warning systems and improving our overall disaster preparedness. And this was specially observed in the case of our cyclone multi-hazard early warning systems, wherein the Meteorological Department and the National Disaster Management Authority of India came to work together closely with each of the state governments and actually identified local communities to build state-of-the-art cyclone multi-hazard early warning systems and also early warning dissemination systems. And this actually had such a huge impact that a super cyclone had hit the coast of Odisha in 1999 that led to the loss of around 10,000 lives. But recently, we have seen similar impact cyclones hit the coast of India at even more regular intervals, but the deaths have been the lives have been saved at multiple rate, and the deaths were only up to like single digits. So this is the impact that can be achieved by involving communities in the overall chain of establishing a community early warning system.
Thank you so much, Shreya, for that deep insight again in the case of India. I'm going to end the panel with a very quick question for Paul on the situation in the Pacific as it pertains to this linkage between early warning and response, and whether you see in your work with the governments there the connection being made both on the I guess on the planning side, but also on the financing side. You're in these conversations with for response financing, as you said, and be interested because the early warnings in the Pacific Islands, as they are in other small island developing states, are incredibly important in terms of creating actions amongst the community.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is clearly a really important linkage, and it's clearly there in the conversation we've been having as well. In particular, most interestingly, in thinking about the drought product and how we've been designing and developing that. One of the aspects of that conversation is to engage very closely with the disaster management officers and the appropriate responsible agencies in the countries to discuss how they want the product to work. In particular, how they want our insurance product to work, how they want the financing to work with respect to their existing disaster management plans, their statuses of alerts versus warnings versus declarations. And in particular, one of the things which I'm always a big advocate for, I view us at PCRIC as developing products we are selling to our clients. And our clients we have to give them ownership of that decision about those products. And in particular, how they split the product between the proportion which is allocated to responsive actions and the proportions which are allocated to early warning actions. I think it's very important that when we're designing these products and developing these financial solutions, that there is a clear ownership of the decisions around how to allocate that funding between the person who's actually going to be responsible for using it.
Great, thanks very much. In the interest of time, I'm going to wrap up the panel there. Big thank you to Shreya and Jen for joining us online, to Emma and Paul for joining me here. And I'll hand the mic to. Oh, I'm going to wrap it up. Oh, so and thank you all for coming. I hope you will take away some good things from the session. It was great to have you all interacting through the breakout groups. So thank you very much. Thanks to Viktoria and to Rachele for the organization, and for UCL and the event hosts for hosting us. Thanks, everybody.